Hi friends, delighted to have you with us today on the Case for Life program, where we aim to equip you to defend your pro-life views persuasively, whether in discussions in the public square, online, or with friends over the water cooler. Today I'm going to jump right to the mailbag because we got a very good question from Jay, and Jay writes the following. Scott, I have a burning question for you to answer on your show. How do you respond when someone asks about abortion for a pregnant 11 or 12-year-old girl? I understand there should be consequences for whoever is responsible for that pregnancy, but should the child be expected to carry the pregnancy to term? Fantastic question, Jay. Thank you for submitting that. I always like to begin these questions with a couple of preliminaries. And the first question I ask myself is this: who is asking the question? And by who, I don't mean the name of the person, but what I mean is it's going to be one of two people that raises this question, either an inquirer or a crusader. And how you answer them will be entirely different based on which type of person you're talking to. So an inquirer is someone who genuinely is trying to learn what you think about abortion, and they're trying to understand your position, and they're actually starting to grasp the moral logic of the pro-life view. They're getting it that, hey, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. They're grasping the moral logic of the pro-life view. That's the inquirer. However, the inquirer is having a psychological difficulty applying her pro-life logic to a hard case scenario. And so she's finding a complexity there. Now, I want to distinguish a second question here, and that is we need to distinguish between moral complexity and psychological complexity. If you hear about a 12-year-old girl who's pregnant, let's say she got raped, she's pregnant, if your heart doesn't break, something is wrong with you. I question your humanity. Of course your heart breaks for that girl. Of course you want the best for her. And of course you feel deeply the pain she would undoubtedly feel on this. You at least sympathize with it, even if you can't obviously fully experience her pain. At least you can have empathy for what she's going through and what her family's going through. In that case, we have what's called psychological complexity. You have a moral principle in play here that we shouldn't intentionally kill innocent human beings, including those in the womb, but you're struggling to reconcile that moral truth with the emotional feelings you feel as you psychologically connect with this girl and give her the empathy she deserves. Okay, that's psychological complexity. Moral complexity is different. That's where we have two moral principles colliding, and we have to decide which of the two gets greater moral weight. For example, you live in World War II, you live in Poland, the Nazis knock at your door, and they say, "Are you hiding Jews?" And you've got a Jewish family hiding under the rug beneath your table. If you tell them the truth, which is something we ought to do normally, the Jews are going to die. If you don't tell them the truth, the Jews live, but you've misled the Nazis. And the question becomes, how do you resolve that? It's a complex moral dilemma, it seems. It's actually not, but at least that's the framework for it. So, of course, what you would do, as I would do, is you're not going to tell the Nazis the truth because they don't deserve it. They're going to use the truth to commit evil against innocent people. And when two moral principles collide, that of being truthful, which we ought to do in almost every case, and saving the lives of innocent human people that will be will be sacrificed if we tell the truth, we give greater moral weight to the principle of saving innocent lives than we do telling the truth to evil men who will use it to perpetrate evil. Okay, so that's the difference between moral complexity and psychological complexity. Just because we feel sympathy for this 11 or 12-year-old girl does not mean that there's no objective moral principle in play. And every time we come to an issue of the hard case on abortion, we can simplify the moral logic in play by asking this question: is this a good reason for intentionally killing an innocent human being? In this case, Does hardship justify homicide? Does the fact that this will be a hardship for the 12-year-old girl justify intentionally killing an innocent human being? And once you frame it expressly as a justification for intentionally killing an innocent human being, the alleged moral complexity tends to evaporate, and we can see through to what the right conclusion should be. And in this case, is it okay to intentionally kill an innocent human fetus simply because he will provoke psychological pain on someone? And the answer is, of course, no. We wouldn't kill a toddler who is causing someone to face hardship. We wouldn't say, okay, you can kill your 6-year-old if it makes your life easier. Now, there could be a case where you say, okay, but wait a minute. In this case, what if the 12-year-old is facing a life-threatening situation by being pregnant? Okay, now we need to look at this a little deeper. If that were the truth, if the pregnancy is indeed threatening her life, notice I didn't say health, which has become broadly defined to where you can drive a Mack truck through it. Psychological health counts, economic health counts, family health counts. I mean, the list goes on by those willing to perform the abortion to justify a health-related abortion. But what about a genuine threat to the mother's life, in this case, the 12-year-old? Well, we're going to handle that question as the way we would any other pregnant woman, and we would say that there are indeed times where the pregnancy threatens the life of the mother, ectopic pregnancy being one example. If you don't end the pregnancy in most of these cases, you will lose 2 human beings. You will lose the child, who we can't save anyway because he has implanted himself on the inner wall of the fallopian tube rather than the uterine wall. And then you will lose the mother, who will die from an internal hemorrhaging as that pregnancy grows in her fallopian tube and that narrow tube bursts. Now, a good doctor will, of course, try to treat both mother and child in this case, treat both as patients, but suppose he can't. Suppose the only life he can save is the mother's. In that case, we're not dealing with abortion, and here's why. Remember our definition of abortion that we put forward when we gave you our pro-life syllogism in episodes past. Premise 1, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Conclusion, therefore abortion is wrong. Now notice in premise 1, we have very carefully defined abortion as the intentional killing of an innocent human being. Actually, we do that in premises 1 and 2. And the point you need to grasp here is this. When a doctor intervenes to save the only life he can, in this case where the mother's life is threatened by the pregnancy, he is not performing an abortion because he does not intend the death of the child in the womb. He can foresee that death, but he doesn't intend it. And by the way, in the case of ectopic pregnancy, for example, he doesn't have an option of saving the life of the child. We don't have the technology to do that. He only has the ability to save the life of the mother, which is the greatest moral good he can do given the circumstance he's been dealt with. Now, let's go back to the case of the 12-year-old. In this situation, is the threat to the mother life or is it health? If it's health, the physician should manage the pregnancy. If it's life, we need to ask this question. I get ending the pregnancy to save the mother's life, where the death of the child is foreseen but not intended. But is there a case medically where we have to kill the fetus to save the mother? How many cases in medicine today is it necessary to intentionally kill the fetus to save the mother? Now, what usually happens in this case is people bring up, well, as that 11 or 12-year-old girl gets late into pregnancy, her uterus can't sustain the child growing into the final stages, and certainly that's going to be a very traumatic event for that child to pass through her pelvic cavity. Therefore, abortion is justified. Well, wait a minute. We do have other options, such as a C-section to remove the child early before the growth of the child directly threatens the mother's life. Why would we have to intentionally kill the child to save the life of the mother when there could be an option of ending the pregnancy that does not involve intentionally killing the child. So that needs to be looked at. This is not a simple, easy thing. Oh yeah, abortion's just fine because the 11 or 12-year-old girl can't sustain the pregnancy. Well, even if that were true, there could be options of a C-section birth, delivering the child early so that we don't subject the mother's body to a risky birthing process that would come if the child went full term. I get all that. Now, if you answer this way to the inquirer, she is at least understanding the moral logic you're putting in place, that you can't just intentionally kill an innocent human being to avoid hardship. But if we're talking about ending a pregnancy to save the mother's life, even early in the pregnancy when the child can't survive, by the way, the child isn't going to survive anyway in the case of ectopic pregnancy, so removing the child does not subject the child to any more of a risky environment than he would have had he stayed in there. He'll die in the womb, he'll die if we remove him, but at least in this case, we save the life of the mother in the process. The death of the child is foreseen, but not intended. With abortion, we both foresee the death of the child and we intend it. That's the point of the abortion, to intentionally kill the human offspring of the mother. So what we want to do here is say the inquirer would begin to recognize these distinctions and would at least be able to make sense of them and ponder them. But when you're dealing with a crusader, a whole nother dynamic is in place. The crusader is not interested in the nuances of your argument. He is not interested in listening to how you might adjudicate between a good option, a morally acceptable option in this case, and one that is not. His only concern in raising this case of the 12-year-old being pregnant is to make you look bad. He wants to win the argument by painting you as an extremist. So you're going to take that away from him by calling his bluff. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to look him square in the eye and say, okay, let's say that we allow abortion for any 12-year-old that's pregnant. And whether it's a health threat, life threat, doesn't matter. Any 12-year-old girl who's pregnant, either through forcible assault or through consensual sex, whatever it might be, although we could make a good argument that there's no such thing as consensual sex with a 12-year-old, but let's play along for the moment. We'll grant that any 12-year-old that's pregnant can have an abortion. Will you now join me in opposing all other abortions that have nothing to do with 12-year-olds? Let me tell you what's going to happen when you call their bluff. 100% of the time, and I do mean 100%, 100% of the time, the crusader's going to look at you and say, no, I won't help you oppose other abortions because abortion is a fundamental right that should be available for any reason the woman wants. Okay, stop right there. If your real position is that abortion is a fundamental right, that means it can never be infringed upon. There can be no restrictions on it at all. Why don't you argue for that extreme position rather than hiding behind pregnant 12-year-olds who are victims and trying to disguise what you really believe by hiding behind them? Call their bluff. And remember, the thing you always want to do is ask this question. Would this work as a good justification for intentionally killing an innocent human being? Suppose we're talking about 6-year-olds who are a stress on a 12-year-old parent. Would it be okay to, or I should say, let's say we had a toddler, a 1-year-old, who had a 13-year-old mother. That's a better way of putting this because 12-year-olds typically don't have 6-year-old children. I need more coffee today. But you do not think it's okay to kill a 1-year-old whose mother happens to be 13 and is having a hard time raising the child. We don't think it'd be okay to snuff out the life of her newborn in order to make her life easier. And the same moral logic would apply here. We do not have a moral green light to intentionally kill an innocent human being to make our lives easier. So that's how I would answer that. I think that 12-year-old pregnant girl deserves the finest medical care we can give her. She deserves to have a great medical team in place to help her through this, as well as support that can come from pro-life Christians at pregnancy centers and physicians that are Christian who care about loving their neighbor, including this 12-year-old girl. I think that's all very important. But to say it's okay to intentionally kill an innocent human being simply because the mother is young and simply because the pregnancy will represent a hardship to her that is non-life threatening, I don't think that's good moral logic. And so the life of the unborn should be protected even in those cases. Well, Jay, thank you for that question. That's excellent. Thank you for raising it. We're going to take a break on this episode of the Case for Life show. When we come back, I want to talk about something troubling that happened this week and the lesson that pro-life leaders and activists need to learn from it. I'll look forward to seeing you right on the other side of that break. Hello, friends. You may not have time to read a full-length treatment of abortion like I've done in this book, The Case for Life, the second edition, but you may have time to take what amounts to 7 sessions, a week's worth of study if you want to do it day by day, to learn how to defend your pro-life views persuasively. We have a basic course that will help you do just that. You will learn how to make a formal case for the pro-life position. You will learn how to defend it with science and philosophy. Even with non-Christians, you can make a case for the pro-life view. Then we'll teach you how to handle objections, how to recognize the 5 bad ways people argue about abortion, and how they often bring up things that are beside the point. You'll learn to keep the main thing, so that you're in charge instead of feeling like you're in the hot seat whenever the issue of abortion comes up. Visit the website for details. Hello, friends. Welcome back. Great to have you with us. If you haven't already done so, please visit our websites. We have a pro-life course there called Pro-Life 101. And in just 1 week, 7 days or 7 sessions, however you want to do it, you can master the fundamentals of the pro-life position and learn how to answer the tough questions like what we deal with on this show. I encourage you to go do that. Again, look for the Pro-Life 101 course and sign up and take that. It'll equip you to make a good case for your pro-life views wherever God opens a door for you to do so. All right, before the break, I mentioned that I wanted to talk about something that was troubling that happened this week. And let me just say up front, I'm not going to name names because it doesn't matter in this case. But a situation came out in the news, and if you know who I'm talking about, I'm not going to direct my comments at this person directly. Instead, I want us to learn a lesson here. But it came out that a particular Christian leader who had had some influence in pro-life circles, principally among the abolitionist types that think there should be no exceptions except a bill that bans all abortions outright and anything else is compromise. This particular Christian leader was removed from leadership for ethical violations. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Because my interest here is not about piling on him. He has repented. He has said that he recognizes the gravity of the sin he committed. And I believe him. And I believe the biblical injunction in this case is very, very clear. You restore such a one to fellowship once they have confessed their sins. Whether they are restored to ministry, that's a question for his leadership team to take up and the elders of his church that he's working with. I don't have any comment on that, but I want to talk about this. We want to be gentle and not judging people who sin because all of us are very close to falling ourselves. And quite frankly, if we're honest, if every thought we've ever had was laid bare publicly, none of us would be qualified for ministry. So my point here is not to pile on, but I do want to point something out. This particular Christian leader had been a friend of mine. In fact, I had been involved in events that he had orchestrated, pro-life events. And I thought we had a good relationship until about 3 years ago or so, when he sent me a message asking me to support a piece of legislation that I had prudential reasons for opposing. And this particular piece of legislation was crafted in such a way that I knew the press and hostile politicians and our adversaries on the other side would be able to exploit against pro-lifers and would harm our efforts to actually save children from abortion. It was a piece of legislation that made it very clear that we were to prosecute women for murder who had abortions. Now, we've talked on this show about laws and consequences, and yes, there should be consequences for intentionally killing an innocent human being. But there is a prudential question that comes into play about how we ought to structure penalties in a post-Roe v. Wade culture, in a culture that has for 50 plus years been told that abortion is a positive good and that women who choose it are doing what's best for themselves and their families and their society. As journalist Katha Pollitt has once pointed out, abortion is good for everyone. It helps families, it helps communities, it helps women. And that has been the mindset of our culture. Abortion is not only permissible, it's a positive good. And millions of our fellow citizens believe that, and they believe that pro-lifers want to see women die, or if not die, rot in jail being charged with murder. Now, I'm not here to argue that there should be no consequences. I think I've already made that point. But there's a prudential question to be asked. I think it's a very good thing to pass laws right now that protect all unborn humans from conception forward. Absolutely, let's do that. But prudence is required when we talk about what should be the penalties legally for having an abortion once it's restricted in a state. And is it prudent for pro-lifers to push legislation that will be presented to the public as bills designed to incarcerate women for murder and maybe even give them the death penalty? I mean, after all, a murderer could be subjected to the death penalty. And the press is going to spin this in ways that are very harmful to our efforts to save children. And if our primary goal is to save kids, pardon me, if our primary goal is to save kids in the womb, we don't want to do things that are going to present pro-life efforts in a bad light and harm our efforts to save those children. Now, what happened was this particular Christian individual who I had been friends with and I thought we had a solid relationship with, did not take kindly to me trying to explain that now may not be the right moment to introduce a bill like he was proposing. And I pointed out to him some historical examples. For example, William Wilberforce withheld his abolition bill on slavery during the beginning stages of the French Revolution, where many members of the British public thought that abolitionists like William Wilberforce were behind the insurrections going on and were actually siding with the French. And therefore, abolitionists were painted in very bad light, and Wilberforce prudently pulled back his abolition bill when he saw that it had zero chance of passing Parliament, and actually to introduce it at that point would have only harmed their longer-term efforts to free all slaves. So Wilberforce was prudent. He wasn't compromising his principle that all slaves deserved to be free, but he was willing to take an incremental step of saying, I'm going to pull back my view and hold it for more favorable times when it will get a more fair hearing. And I think there's room for pro-lifers to disagree and have vigorous debates over when is it appropriate to introduce a particular bill, when is the best time to do that, where it has the best chance of passing, and helping efforts in other states. There's a good faith discussion or debate, if you will, to be had among pro-lifers, and I'm all for that. And I am thankful for friends of mine. I have some friends in the abolitionist movement who have been very even-handed, very fair-minded, and they have brought points of view to the table that I have not initially agreed with, but maybe tempered my views a little because of their input, and maybe they've tempered their views a bit because of mine. And I think that's all good and healthy. We can have that debate, and that strengthens the movement. But this particular leader did not go that route. He did not propose a good faith discussion. He instead questioned if I really believed in the sufficiency of Scripture. And did I really trust God, or was I trusting on man's logic? In fact, he even went so far as to say, you're just using human reasoning rather than biblical truth. And I just found that very strange. It poisons the well because it doesn't engage the argument I was making. It just attacks me for not being a biblically grounded Christian. And I would say to us as pro-lifers, we're going to have to learn to do what theologian Carl F. Henry talked about. We need to learn to triage our beliefs. There are some things we need to divide over as Christians. For example, a so-called Christian who denies the divinity of Christ, denies that Jesus is the only way to salvation, denies that he rose from the dead, is not a Christian I can fellowship with because they've given up too much. They aren't Christian in what they believe. They're now something else. A so-called pro-lifer who says, I want to protect some children in the womb, but not all of them. I want there to be abortion services available for women who face health threats, or maybe were impregnated through rape. I don't think we should protect rape children. Okay, that's someone compromising on principle. But a pro-lifer who says, I want to protect all children, but I realize the political environment we're in right now may not allow me to do so, so I'm going to work to limit the evil done as much as I can and promote the good as much as I can while I remain committed to protecting all children. That's not compromise, that's prudence. And I think we as pro-lifers need to be very careful, and I hope the lesson learned from this tragic fall of this Christian leader I'm talking about right now, I hope the lesson learned is not that we gloat over someone who we disagreed with running into a buzzsaw. That's a very unbiblical and uncharitable and an unchristian way to look at this. Instead, we need to examine our own hearts. Am I blowing people off just because they disagree with me on a matter of prudence rather than principle? And we need to become adept at distinguishing the difference between prudential questions we should have a good faith debate about and principles that we can't compromise on. I can't compromise on the principle that it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being in the womb. I'm not going to compromise on that. However, I may compromise legislatively if I don't have a favorable political environment to advance protection for all unborn humans. These are things we as Christians need to become more comfortable at doing. We need to let iron sharpen iron and attribute to the people we're debating and conversing with good motives, not the worst possible motives. Thanks for joining us today. Let's go out there and together love our fellow pro-lifers. Let's debate them. Let's not aim to destroy them. We're on the same team. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for joining us today.